Betrayed for a younger man, the ultimate payback. Darren had always considered his life with Rachel to be stable. They'd been married for 10 years, shared 2 beautiful kids, and, though there had been a few bumps along the way, he thought they'd weathered every storm. He worked hard, long hours, trying to provide a good life for his family, while Rachel, in his mind, took care of the home. Sure, she'd been distant lately, but he chalked it up to the stresses of work and raising kids. It was just one of those days where everything seemed to pile up. Darren had come home late from a long shift, his body aching, ready to spend a quiet evening with his family. The kids were already tucked into bed, and he was about to join them when his phone buzzed. He didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was a text from a colleague or a friend, but when he glanced at the screen, his stomach sank. It was from Rachel. The words on the screen hit him like a freight train. "I'm leaving you for someone else. I've already packed." He froze, staring at the message as his mind tried to make sense of it. He didn't want to believe it. She had to be joking. She had to be. His hands shook as he tried calling her, over and over, but the phone just rang and rang, unanswered. Panic started to creep in, but he tried to push it down. Maybe she was upset. Maybe this was just a temporary thing, a result of all the tension between them. But then he checked the bedroom just to be sure. And there it was. Her suitcase, gone. Half of her clothes, gone. The reality of the situation hit him with full force. His heart raced, his thoughts scrambled. He couldn't comprehend it. How could this happen? Just like that? His stomach twisted, the weight of betrayal sinking in deep. His mind kept spinning, desperately searching for an explanation, but there was none. Rachel was gone, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Darren's world was still spinning. He barely slept the night before, his mind replaying the events over and over, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so suddenly. But no matter how hard he tried to make sense of it, there was one thing that kept gnawing at him. Rachel had taken everything. He couldn't sit still. His first instinct was to go to the bank, hoping that maybe there had been some mistake. Maybe the accounts hadn't really been drained. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope. But when he stood in front of the teller and saw the balance, it was as if the ground had been ripped from beneath him. Every penny gone. His savings, their joint accounts, everything they had worked so hard to build over the years, reduced to nothing. His breath caught in his throat as he tried to process what he was seeing. The money, the future he thought they had, was all gone. Darren's hands shook as he left the bank, his mind racing. He immediately tried calling Rachel, but as expected, no answer. He sent text after text, desperate for some kind of explanation, but she didn't reply. Just as he was about to lose hope, his phone buzzed. It was Rachel finally responding, but the words she sent were nothing like he expected. The coldness of her message hit him like a slap to the face. "I'm sorry, Darren, but I'm done. I'm in love with someone else. I'm taking the kids, and I'm not coming back." Her words burned into his chest, and he couldn't breathe. She was taking the kids? His kids. How could she do this? How could she take everything from him, including the very children he had spent years raising? His mind raced, thoughts colliding. He stared at the screen, rereading her message over and over, but it never changed. There was no anger, no pleading for reconciliation, just cold finality. It wasn't just that Rachel was leaving him. No, it was the realization that this had all been planned. She hadn't just made a snap decision. This was deliberate. She had taken the money, taken the kids, and left him with nothing. He was shattered, angry, and lost, his heart sinking deeper with each passing second. Darren stood there, in the middle of the room, fighting the rising tide of emotion. Betrayal, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness washed over him. How could she do this? How could someone he had spent 10 years with, someone he had trusted with everything, turn so cold? And yet, as he let the reality of the situation sink in, a cold, hard truth began to settle in his chest. Rachel hadn't just left him emotionally. She had taken everything, his stability, his future, his very life's work. She had planned this, calculated it, and now he was left to pick up the pieces. Darren didn't know how to move forward. What was he supposed to do now? Darren spent the next few days in a daze, caught between anger and disbelief. The world he had built with Rachel, the family, the home, the future, had crumbled in the blink of an eye. Yet, somewhere deep within him, a nagging thought began to surface. Something didn't sit right. This didn't feel like a spur-of-the-moment decision. Rachel's departure, the suddenness of it, the cold finality of her words. It was all too calculated, too precise. He couldn't shake the feeling that she had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. As the shock began to wear off, Darren started to reflect on the subtle changes he had ignored. The growing distance between them, the late nights, the unexplained absences. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. Rachel had been pulling away for far longer than he realized. There were signs he had missed, little moments that, at the time, seemed insignificant. But now, they screamed of something far deeper. His heart ached as he thought back to the last few months. He remembered the days when she seemed detached, barely engaged in their conversations, her focus always somewhere else. He'd written it off as stress or personal issues, assuming it was just a phase. But now, in the wake of her departure, everything seemed to fit into place. She had been planning her escape, preparing herself for this moment long before it happened. Darren's mind raced. How could he have been so blind? But then another realization hit him. He wasn't completely helpless in this situation. There was one decision he had made, one move he'd taken months ago that could make all the difference now. He'd done it quietly without telling anyone, not even Rachel. It was a decision that had seemed like a precaution at the time, a just-in-case measure when he noticed the growing tension between them. A few months before their split, Darren had moved his savings into a separate account, away from their joint funds. It hadn't been easy, but he had done it in small increments, careful not to draw attention. He trusted Rachel, but he wasn't foolish. Now, looking back, Darren realized that that single, quiet action was the one thing that had spared him from total financial devastation. As Rachel took everything she could, his money, their home, the kids, Darren understood the gravity of his foresight. His savings were safe, tucked away in an account she knew nothing about. It wasn't much, but it was something. And right now, that something could make all the difference. As he sat in his living room, staring blankly at the walls that once held his family, Darren felt a renewed sense of resolve. He wasn't going to let Rachel walk away with everything. She had already taken so much from him, his family, his peace of mind, but she wasn't going to take his future too. He couldn't just sit back and let this happen. This wasn't just about money. It was about control, about making sure that he wasn't left completely powerless. He had to act fast. He knew Rachel would come for what he had left, and he couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. Darren stood up, his chest tight with determination. He wasn't going to let this be the end. He had lost a lot, but he still had something left, and he wasn't about to let her take that too. He would fight. The moment Rachel discovered that Darren had moved his savings into a separate account, everything changed. At first, she tried to keep her composure, but it didn't take long for the rage to surface. The texts started flooding in, her anger almost palpable in every word. She accused him of hiding assets, of being deceitful, of trying to rob her of what was rightfully hers. Darren, still reeling from everything that had already happened, read each message with a growing sense of disbelief. "You think you can just hide money from me?" she wrote. "You think I won't find out? I'm going to make you regret this." The accusations felt like a slap in the face, but Darren kept his cool. He didn't rise to her provocation, didn't engage in her heated exchanges. He knew that reacting emotionally would only give her more ammunition. Still, he couldn't help but feel a surge of frustration. How dare she accuse him of hiding things when she had taken everything, including their kids? He tried to respond with calm, measured words, but it was clear Rachel wasn't listening. She had made up her mind. The next thing he knew, a letter arrived, official, cold, and threatening. Rachel had hired a lawyer. She was preparing for battle. Darren sat at the kitchen table, the letter in front of him, his hands shaking as he read it. She was going after everything. She wasn't just angry about the money. No, she was making claims for half of everything, half of his separate account, half of everything he had managed to keep for himself. "I am entitled to half of everything," the letter said, "and I will stop at nothing to get what I deserve." The sheer entitlement in her words left Darren speechless. He had been careful. He had made sure the account was separate, legally protected. But now Rachel was treating the situation like a battle for the spoils of war, determined to take every last piece of what they had built together. It wasn't about fairness, it was about her trying to make him pay for what she saw as a betrayal, for the fact that he had done something she hadn't expected. But the threats didn't stop there. A few days later, Rachel called him. This time, there was no pretense, no civility. Her voice was cold, angry, filled with venom. "You think you've won?" she spat. "I'll take you to court, Darren. You can't hide behind this money forever. And you know what? I'm going to take the kids too. They deserve to be with their mother, not some man who can't even keep his family together." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. The kids. His children. Rachel was threatening to take them away from him, too. She wasn't just going after his money, now she was trying to strip him of the one thing he had left. The one thing he couldn't bear to lose. Darren's heart raced. His throat tightened. The thought of his children, his little ones, the ones he had raised, the ones who looked to him for comfort and security, being taken from him was too much to bear. He knew she wasn't just speaking out of anger anymore. She was serious. She was willing to fight for full custody, no matter the cost. The legal battle was no longer just about money. It had become a battle for his children's future, and that was a fight Darren would not back down from. The tension between them escalated. Darren's lawyer began to prepare their defense, gathering every document, every piece of evidence they could find. But Darren knew that Rachel wasn't going to back off easily. She had already made up her mind to destroy him, to take everything from him. It wasn't just about winning for her, it was about making him pay for the life she felt she deserved, the one she thought he had stolen from her. As the weeks passed, the fight between them became a war of attrition. Legal documents flew back and forth, accusations flying in every direction. But Darren's resolve only grew stronger. He had made his move before, and now he wasn't going to back down. Every day, as he prepared for the looming court battle, Darren reminded himself of why he was fighting. It wasn't just for his savings. It wasn't just for the house. It was for his kids, his future, his dignity. He couldn't let Rachel take everything from him, not again. And so, as the legal threats kept coming, Darren steeled himself for the fight of his life. He wasn't going to lose. Not this time. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Darren stood outside the courthouse, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of everything he had been through, the shock, the betrayal, the mounting legal threats, felt almost unbearable. But today he was ready. He had prepared for this moment. Every document was in place, every detail meticulously organized. As he walked into the courtroom, he could feel the tension in the air. Rachel was already seated, her lawyer beside her, eyes cold and calculating. Darren didn't even look at her. He couldn't. The woman he had once loved, the mother of his children, was now his adversary, and the gulf between them had never felt wider. The session began, and immediately Rachel's lawyer launched into accusations. They claimed Darren had hidden assets, that he was being deceitful by moving his savings into a separate account. The words stung, but Darren remained calm. His lawyer stood beside him, nodding in approval. It was clear what Rachel was trying to do. She wanted to paint him as the villain, as the one who had betrayed her, as the one who had taken everything. But Darren wasn't about to let that happen. This was his moment. The preparation he had done, the research, the quiet vigilance, it was all about to pay off. With a steady hand, Darren's lawyer presented the first piece of evidence, a set of financial documents that Darren had meticulously tracked during their separation. The room fell silent as the papers were passed around. Rachel's lawyer tried to object, but it was clear they were losing ground. The evidence showed something shocking. Rachel hadn't just taken the money from their joint accounts, she had been siphoning funds into her own secret account for months. But that wasn't all. It turned out that she had been funneling large sums of money into the personal account of her new boyfriend, Sebastian, long before their separation. It wasn't a sudden decision on her part. No, this had been a plan in motion for months. She had been preparing to leave Darren for Sebastian, hiding assets from him, moving money, all while pretending everything was fine at home. Darren watched as the courtroom absorbed this revelation. He could see the shock on the judge's face, on Rachel's lawyer's face, and even on Rachel herself. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the truth hung in the air, and Darren felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It was all there, laid bare in front of them, proof that Rachel had been the one hiding things, the one manipulating the situation. The tide had shifted. Rachel's lawyer stammered, trying to regain control of the narrative, but it was too late. The truth had already been exposed. Darren's calm, collected presentation of the evidence had flipped the entire situation on its head. Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief as Darren's lawyer continued to present more documents, emails, wire transfers, and even conversations that Rachel had tried to keep secret. It was clear now that Darren hadn't been the deceitful one. He had been the one left in the dark, the one who had been blindsided by the woman he had trusted with his entire life. The courtroom was stunned. There was no denying it now. Rachel had planned her escape from the beginning, and she had done everything in her power to make sure Darren never saw it coming. But now her lies were exposed and there was no turning back. For a brief moment, Darren allowed himself a small smile, though he quickly wiped it away. This wasn't a victory yet, but it was the first real step in taking control of his life again. The courtroom had heard the truth, and it was undeniable. The accusations Rachel had made against him, the claims of deceit, all fell apart. The emotional weight that had been crushing Darren for so long began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. He had fought for his future, for his children, and now, finally, the truth was out. The narrative had shifted in his favor. As the judge prepared to deliberate, Darren couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. This wasn't just about money or custody. It was about taking back control of his life. And in that moment, he knew he had done everything he could to protect himself and his family. Rachel's once unshakable confidence had crumbled, and Darren was standing tall. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, he felt like he had a real chance at winning. The day the verdict came, Darren walked into the courtroom with a sense of quiet determination. He knew the battle was nearly over, but the weight of the past few months hung heavily on his shoulders. The struggle, the pain, the endless sleepless nights, it had all led to this moment. The judge's decision was about to reshape his future, and for once, Darren felt a glimmer of hope. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the ruling. His voice echoed through the room, each word carrying the weight of a battle fought and won. The judge first addressed the custody arrangement, ruling in Darren's favor. Primary custody of the children will be granted to Mr. Miller, with Ms. Bennett having visitation rights, he declared. Darren's heart skipped a beat. His children, his world, would be with him. The judge's decision was a reflection of everything he had fought for, the years he had spent as their father, the times he had shown up when Rachel had turned away. Then came the financial part. The judge spoke with finality: the assets of the marriage will be divided fairly. However, Mr. Miller's separate account is not subject to division, as it was legally protected and separate from the marital assets. Rachel's attempt to claim half of everything Darren had saved, to take away the financial security he had fought so hard to protect, was denied. As the ruling sunk in, Darren couldn't help but feel a sense of relief flood through him. The fight had been long, but he had come out victorious. His children would be with him, and he had successfully protected everything that mattered. His future was secure, and for the first time in months, Darren could breathe. He glanced at Rachel. Her face was pale, her eyes hard with anger and disbelief. It was clear that the shock of the ruling was settling in. She had expected a financial windfall, the life she had planned with Sebastian, but instead she was left with nothing. Her reputation, already tarnished by the evidence Darren had presented, was now irreparably damaged. There was no hiding from the truth anymore. As Darren walked out of the courtroom, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't just the legal victory that mattered, it was the sense of justice, the feeling that for once, everything had fallen into place. He had protected his children, his dignity, and his future. For the first time in a long while, Darren felt like he was standing on solid ground. The emotional scars from the divorce would remain. There would be moments when the pain resurfaced, when the memories of betrayal and loss threatened to overwhelm him. But Darren had learned something valuable through this battle. He had learned that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always a way to take control of your life, to rise above the ashes of the past. He was no longer the man who had been blindsided by Rachel's betrayal. He was no longer the man who felt lost, helpless, and alone. He was stronger now, wiser, more resilient, and ready to move forward. Darren smiled, though it was bittersweet. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But as he looked at his children, their faces filled with hope and love, he knew he was ready. He had fought for them, for his future, and now he would build a life that was entirely his. A life where he called the shots. A life where he would never again allow anyone to take control of his destiny. And as he walked out of that courthouse, Darren felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. It wasn't just the end of the legal battle. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where Darren Miller, no longer a man broken by betrayal, but a man reborn, would take charge of his life, his happiness, and the future he would create for himself and his children.